We're back once again with another captivating story by Ronald Burns. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to explore more of his works on Amazon. We've included links in the description box below to make it easy for you to dive into his world of storytelling. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a new story. Now let's begin. Dating and marriage are two entirely different worlds. Dating is a whirlwind of excitement, an indulgence in fleeting passion, where responsibility is merely an afterthought. It's 90% fun and only 10% the struggle of balancing work and real life. Marriage, however, is just the opposite. The daily grind of bills, errands, responsibilities, and emotional support takes center stage. If anyone enters marriage expecting it to be an endless parade of thrilling dates and heart-pounding romance, they are either naive or unprepared for reality. That isn't to say that marriage is devoid of happiness, excitement, or deep emotional connection. It just manifests differently. It is not an all-consuming blaze fueled by grand gestures and wild passion, but rather a steady, carefully nurtured flame. Yet, not everyone sees it that way. I'm Steve. My wife, Alexa, and I have been married for 30 years. We met in college when I was working as a part-time lifeguard at the swimming pool. Back then, I was in my prime, fit, young, and surrounded by beautiful women in bathing suits. Alexa was one of them. She was taking a swimming class, and to me, she had the most perfect body on campus. I was somewhat of an expert on the subject, given my relentless field study, one that, I'll admit, I never entirely abandoned. She was single, and so was I. 2 years later, we were married. Decades have passed since those days, yet I still find my wife beautiful. I still admire her body, still compliment her, but she no longer seems to hear me. Our intimacy had been fading for a while, but since September, it had come to a screeching halt. I didn't need a private investigator to tell me my wife was cheating. I knew. I saw it in the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she no longer did. There was a distance in her eyes, an unwillingness to meet my gaze, an avoidance that spoke louder than words. It all started after a Labor Day picnic at her sister June's house. That day, I saw something shift in Alexa. She became enamored with June's brother-in-law, Tommy, a college student, young, fit, and bearing an uncanny resemblance to Billy, the man who broke Alexa's heart all those years ago. Billy had been her first great love, but he had been unfaithful, running off with a waitress and leaving her shattered. She never fully let go of that pain. I had always known that I was, in a way, her second choice, a rebound from Billy. She had even kept an old shoebox hidden in the back of her closet, filled with photos of their time together. I could understand nostalgia. I, too, occasionally wondered about my first love from junior high, though time had blurred even her name. Was it Mary or Marie? But reminiscing and acting on those emotions are two different things. Alexa, it seemed, wanted to rewrite history. Maybe being surrounded by young students at the college where she worked made her feel like she, too, should be young again. Maybe, in her subconscious, she was the only one aging while the rest of the world remained unchanged. She spent hours worrying about wrinkles, dyed the gray from her hair, and dressed like a college girl in a desperate attempt to turn back the clock. Meanwhile, I had settled into the comfortable routine of adulthood. I was a contract lawyer at a bank. My job wasn't thrilling, but it had provided us with a home, stability, and security for over 25 years. It had funded our children's education and covered years of therapy and antidepressants for my wife. At 50, I looked my age, less hair, now white, but I kept in shape. I worked out, rode my bike on weekends, and entered races in the senior classification. I wasn't 20 anymore, but I could still hold my own. Alexa's new habits did not go unnoticed. She began working late, attending meetings and conferences with increasing frequency. She locked her phone, a first in our marriage. Her new clothes, new hair, and sudden disinterest in intimacy were glaring signs. She thought I was too blind to see it, but I wasn't an idiot. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to throw away 30 years of our lives, tell our children, or admit that my marriage had become a failure. I had sacrificed promotions that required travel because I valued my family more than my career. And yet, here I was wondering if, after all these years, I had made a mistake. If Alexa no longer wanted me, would anyone else? I held out hope that her infatuation would burn out, that Tommy would lose interest. But that wasn't happening. Reconciliation was slipping through my fingers. I knew I had to act, not with quiet acceptance, but with finality. If my marriage was going to end, it would end with a bang, not a whimper. I could have gone straight to a divorce lawyer. I knew plenty, but I wanted something more. Revenge. My wife was predictable. Every Monday and Thursday morning, she left for 2-hour shopping trips, but returned empty-handed. She drank her 2 strong black coffees every morning on an empty stomach, a habit she refused to break for the sake of her figure. If she was going to throw away our marriage, she was going to pay for it in ways she never expected. Before I executed my plan, I made one last attempt at salvation. I suggested a trip to Hawaii, just the 2 of us, to reconnect. She refused. Said she wasn't in the mood for a vacation. That was it. That was the moment I knew our marriage was truly dead. She couldn't even stand the thought of being away from Tommy for a week. The love I had for her evaporated in that instant. I had been faithful to her for 30 years, but now I no longer saw the need. I wasn't going to seek out another woman, but if one pursued me, I wouldn't resist. I continued as if nothing had changed, going through our daily routine, all while carefully planning my next move. I have to confess, when someone betrays me, I can be ruthless. And Alexa had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The love I once felt for her had morphed into something else entirely. Thanksgiving confirmed my suspicions. At June's dinner table, Alexa couldn't take her eyes off Tommy. She clung to his every word, laughed at his most mundane observations as if he were the most brilliant man in the room. June, clearly uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation toward Tommy's fiancée, but Alexa refused to acknowledge it. She was utterly fixated on him, as if his mere presence had transported her back in time. I decided then and there, I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I was going to make sure Alexa regretted every single decision she had made. And so the game began. I managed my fiancé's divorced mother's sporting goods store. The money was steady, so I had no reason to change course. That was my plan, to keep doing what I was doing. As we left the Thanksgiving gathering, Alexa bid her sister and brother-in-law farewell with polite pecks on the cheek. But when she turned to Tommy, her lips met his in a kiss that lingered just a moment too long. It was subtle, fleeting, yet undeniable. The moment she pulled back, her eyes darted around, searching for any signs that we had noticed. June's husband, standing nearby, looked quietly pleased with his younger brother's conquest, while June herself seemed burdened with shame. I, on the other hand, feigned ignorance, though that moment only solidified my resolve. I needed to be certain. Was Tommy the only one, or were there others? Curiosity got the best of me, and one morning, I left early for work only to double back, borrowing a co-worker's car so my wife wouldn't recognize mine. I followed her, keeping a careful distance as she navigated through town. My destination was no surprise. Starbucks, the one next to a middling hotel, where she parked and met him, her tall, blonde, and disgustingly handsome young lover. I despised him. He wasn't wealthy. A Starbucks coffee alone was probably a stretch for him, let alone a hotel room. That meant Alexa was paying. No, that meant I was paying. Some people use alcohol, cannabis, or cocaine to enhance their indulgences. My wife, she used coffee. It was her only vice, until adultery overtook it. I barely registered whether the sun was shining or if the sky was weeping that day. The only thing I could see was the woman I had loved for 3 decades betraying me. But I didn't storm in. What would be the point? She had already made her choice. My marriage was dead, and all that remained was to decide how it would be buried, quietly or in flames. I considered the usual acts of vengeance, emptying the bank accounts, canceling her credit cards, confronting her in a fit of rage. But none of it satisfied me. Then a new idea took shape, one that required patience, precision, and most importantly, secrecy. My wife had always been a bit of a hypochondriac. At least twice a year, she convinced herself she was having a heart attack, and I, the ever-dutiful husband, would drive her to the hospital. Once, she was so certain her appendix was about to burst that she demanded we rush to the ER, completely forgetting that it had been removed years ago. Her addiction to coffee and adultery, combined with her tendency toward imagined illnesses, would be her undoing. I visited a health food store across town, one she had never stepped foot in, and paid cash for caffeine powder, enough to make a heart race uncontrollably. Then I purchased the strongest Brazilian coffee I could find, the kind with caffeine levels higher than most. To complete the setup, I bought reusable coffee capsules and a grinder, allowing us to use the premium coffee in our machine. When I brought the supplies home, Alexa was ecstatic, completely unaware that she was holding the tools of her own humiliation. The Thursday after Thanksgiving, I put my plan into motion. I had learned that consuming more than 400 milligrams of caffeine in one sitting could mimic the symptoms of a heart attack: racing pulse, irregular heartbeats, shortness of breath. I prepared 5 coffee capsules, each filled with the high-caffeine Brazilian blend. Then, I added an extra 1,500 milligrams of pure caffeine powder. That morning, as always, Alexa had her usual 2 cups of coffee on an empty stomach before heading out, straight into the arms of her lover. She commented on how rich and bold the new coffee tasted. She had no idea that within an hour, she would believe she was dying. And that is exactly what happened. Tommy, the ever-faithful toy boy, was the one who called 911. He did so anonymously from the hotel room when Alexa, mid-affair, clutched at her chest and gasped that she couldn't breathe. In her panic, she demanded that he summon a priest so she could receive the last rites, believing herself to be knocking on death's door. To his credit, he waited until the paramedics arrived before running away. When I received the call, I rushed to the hospital, arriving just in time to witness my wife, hooked up to machines, her face pale with terror, as the priest stood beside her, murmuring prayers over her sobbing confession. The doctors quickly determined the truth. There was no heart attack, no life-threatening condition, just too much caffeine and too much exertion. I spoke briefly with the paramedics and learned everything. They had found her naked in a hotel room, tangled in the remnants of her indiscretion. I didn't return to her bedside. Instead, I drove straight to the bank and moved half of our savings into my name alone. Then I made a call to a friend, an accident lawyer, for a referral to the best divorce attorney in the city. When I arrived home, I methodically destroyed all traces of my caffeine-infused revenge. But my work wasn't finished. Next, I reached out to Helen, Tommy's employer, his fiancée's mother, no less. We met for coffee, and I laid everything out for her, piece by piece. Helen was a striking woman, curvaceous with an angelic face, and I found myself wondering why her husband had ever strayed. We discovered we had a lot in common. We were both fitness enthusiasts, both betrayed by the people we had loved, and both seeking a way forward. She invited me back to her store, where I intended to purchase a weight rack. As she stood beside the barbells, her black tights and form-fitting top accentuating every curve, I found myself slipping into old habits. "That's a great rack," I muttered, referring to the equipment. She smirked and placed a hand on her chest. "Which one did you mean?" I should have been embarrassed. I wasn't. Instead, Helen laughed, took my hand, and placed it over her heart. "And they're all natural," she teased. That was the moment I realized something. Alexa had been right about one thing. Life didn't have to be dull just because we were older. I set the final pieces of my revenge into place. Tommy lost his job that very afternoon, and by evening, his fiancée had broken off their engagement. I filed for divorce and saw Alexa only once more, in the courtroom. She never apologized, never sought forgiveness. Instead, she pursued Tommy, though he wanted nothing more to do with her. Since we had earned nearly identical salaries, she was denied alimony. Our assets were divided, and we went our separate ways. Then I finished the job. I bypassed HR and went straight to the president of the college, a man I had met at numerous events over the years. As a licensed psychologist, Alexa had an ethical obligation not to engage in relationships with her patients. Tommy had been one of her students. She was forced to resign, her license soon revoked. But the final blow? I tracked down Billy, her long-lost college love, the one she had never gotten over. For a small fee, Billy agreed to pay her a visit. I expected her to recoil in horror at the sight of what he had become, a bald, overweight short-order cook. Instead, she threw her arms around him, declaring her undying love. Today, they live together in a tiny apartment above a greasy diner, where she works as a waitress. Meanwhile, I'm building a new life. With Helen, and our newborn son. In the end, Alexa's betrayal set me free.